know, there are times when a new channel pops up and I just kind of follow it for a little while before I do any reactions to it. And the reason for that is that sometimes I might come to an immediate conclusion as to what I think about that channel, and I might be wrong. Sometimes I just get, something about it that might bug me, or I might think, oh, this is a really good channel, and then I watch a few more of their videos and I start to think, actually, these people really annoy the bejesus out of me, and, I'm gonna unsubscribe. So, generally, when it gets to the point of me covering a channel, doing a reaction to somebody's video, it's usually because I have actually followed them for a while, unless I happen to land on a video that is a standout. Either it is a really good video and straight away I'm sold, or it's a video where I look at it and I think, okay, you've just ticked me off big time, game on, I'm going to do a reaction anyway. I've been watching this channel for a little while and I'm still a little undecided on this creator and I'm not sure why. But when this video popped up, straight away, when he has a thumbnail that is giving the impression that in Australia it is raining spiders, and of course he has 5 things an American hates about Australia, well, to me that was immediately game on. I needed to have a look at the video, and having watched just the first portion of the video, I thought, okay, I'm definitely going to do a reaction to this video. So this is yet another American who has recently come to Australia. He's recently started this channel, so he's only got 27 videos, and it's called Scotty Travels. Now, I haven't watched all his videos, but from glancing at his travels, I'm pretty certain he's actually never been to Uluru, even though you get that impression from the image on his header. In fact, I gather he actually hasn't travelled very far within Australia. So perhaps that name is a suggestion of things to come, but so far I don't think we've seen much in terms of him travelling anywhere. Anyway, that's not the point of this video. This video is to react to his comments of 5 things that an American hates about Australia.
Hello, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Scott. I'm an American that lives in this beautiful country of Australia. And today we're going to be talking about the 5 things that I hate about Australia. Let's get into it. Now, I should preface this by saying that there is nothing that I actually really hate about Australia. There's very few things in this world that I hate other than the Kansas City Chiefs. But there are some things that I dislike about Australia. No matter where you're from, there's going to be things you dislike about where you're from. And so these are just my opinions. I'm going to be wrong on some things more than likely, and you're going to disagree with me on some things. That's okay. But either way, let's get into it.
Okay, I've learned to be wary. Whenever I hear someone who is making a things I hate about Australia video, and in the first part of the video they try to tone it down by saying, well, they're not things I hate, they're things that I dislike. They're trying to tone it down and reel it back. But to me, it seems like every time I see a video and someone does this, these are usually the ones where they really let rip, and the ones where I become triggered because of the things they're saying. It's like they're toning it back because they know that they're just about to hit hard with the things they're going to say. I don't know, like I said, I've only watched the first part of this video, so I don't know if that is the case with this video, but it certainly makes me wary.
The first thing that I don't like, the thing that I don't love about Australia is the slow service. Now, granted, I'm generalizing, yes, I will say that. Sometimes the service is absolutely phenomenal, especially if you're like the only person in a restaurant or at a, at a bar or whatever. You're going to get quick service. With that said, what I've noticed, and I think this has to do like twofold. One, Australia is a much slower pace of life kind of place. People are more chill here. There's less of a rush to get things done, and so therefore the service is slower. The second thing is going to be the fact that there's no tipping. Tipping really isn't a thing here. It's slowly starting to creep in, but I think Australians are going to, I don't think if you're putting out a tip jar, you're getting many tips. So because there's no tipping, there's no incentive for people to serve you faster. In America, there's like a hustle. You're trying to get things out as fast as possible and give good service, and then hopefully you get a better tip. Here, you get paid the same amount no matter how good or how bad the service is. And therefore, the service is slower. It's not like it's atrociously slow. It's just slower than what I'm used to, especially being from a town like Vegas where it's just go, 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 and people are working for tips. Things are a lot more hustly, and things happen faster because of that. So yeah, that is the first thing that I don't love about Australia is the slower service.
So straight up, this has got me ticked off. If you're coming to Australia and you're not coming here for the lifestyle, why are you coming here? What do I mean by that? Well, in Australia, we are a little bit laid back. We are certainly a heck of a lot laid back, or more laid back, than Las Vegas. So, if you're coming to Australia and expecting the hustle of Las Vegas, even if you go to Sydney, you are not going to get that. Here it is about enjoying the moments. And when someone goes to work, it's not about having them stressed to the max, trying to get someone's coffee to them in under 60 seconds. It's about doing your job efficiently and still wanting to come back and do your job the next day. And I think that's probably the difference. We have a very, very different hospitality culture here. And no, you don't have to live off your tips because people are paid a decent wage. That said, if you are a slow server, chances are your boss is going to nail your ass to the wall if you don't pick up your speed. So, saying that the service is slow here in Australia is definitely an overgeneralisation, and I think it would have been better to say it is slower than Las Vegas. And I would imagine just thinking about the hustle and bustle of Las Vegas just puts my anxiety levels through the roof. And I'm glad that Australia is not like that. I'm glad that when I go to a bakery and order a coffee, that the server wants to know how my day's going. And they're not going to just take my money and zip over and start making the coffee and pretend that I'm just a brick in the wall, essentially. So, culture. That's what it comes down to. It is a culture. If you don't like it, well, you don't have to stay. In terms of the comment that tipping is slowly creeping in, no, tipping has always existed here in Australia, but it is a very different tipping culture here in Australia. You tend to see it in terms of most places will have a tip jar, like cafes and that will have a tip jar on the counter. A lot of people just don't worry about tipping unless someone does something exceptional in terms of service. In some restaurants, yes, tips maybe you may see people being more generous with tips in restaurants because that's when you're going to get the higher service. But I don't think it's something that's creeping in per se. It's just that is what our tip culture has always been. That's what it is always going to be. It's never going to be like American tipping culture. That's just a completely different world from Australia. In terms of in saying that, well, there's no incentive for servers to be quick, so they don't bother. Again, it's a cultural difference. Australian servers aren't laissez-faire with their attitude. They're not like, oh, we don't give a rat's ass, so we're not going to bother putting an effort in with our service. It's just that they are working at what is considered acceptable service speed in Australia. Yes, occasionally you go to places where the service kind of sucks, but you don't go back there again. Or if it's somewhere that you go regularly and you get a new server and the service kind of sucks, then you put it down to the fact that they're new and you figure that they will learn the ropes and get better as time goes by.
The second thing that I don't love about Australia is going to be the parking situation. Now, again, there are some situations where parking is great. Australia has a lot more free parking than you would think, especially in places where normally would be paid parking. Like right now, if you watch my vlog, I'm doing this after the vlog, and I'm sitting down in Manly, and right where I'm sitting, it's like, I think 2 hours free, and anybody can park here. And generally, when you come down here, even on a busy day, there's always parking, and it's free, and that's nice. However, what I don't love is going to like the grocery store or going to the mall or the arcade or whatever you want to call it. Those parking spots tend to be pretty tight, and that's because Australia is, ironically, they're kind of strapped for land. Maybe they're not strapped for land as much as they try to preserve or use the least amount of land possible, which I appreciate. I appreciate being from a place where, you know, a shopping center can take up like 40, 50 acres just in like, you know, 70% parking lot. I appreciate that they do their best to make the parking lot small and not have a huge footprint. But that does mean that the parking spaces are small and the like room to get past each other is quite tight. And I don't know how. Like I'm looking right now, there's a Dodge Ram, like a pretty nice Dodge Ram, but a Dodge Ram nonetheless. I have no idea how that man parks his car anywhere. Going to the shopping malls, like all of the spots are what we would call like compact spots in America, and the compact spots here might as well be for motorcycles. So that's something that I just don't love. It's nerve-wracking to try to park a car here. Maybe I'll get a Dodge Ram. Why not? America.
Again, seems to be assumptions based on American culture without actually trying to do a bit of research. Let's talk about parking spaces in Australia. The reason that our parking spaces are so much smaller than parking spaces in America is because the planning for those shopping centres, or they're not malls, they're not arcades, the planning for those shopping centres has occurred based on Australian vehicles. And in Australia, up until recently, our vehicles were more regular in size, let's say. And you do see far more compact vehicles in Australia, and you see far fewer of these big monster vehicles, which seem to be the trend in America. Unlike America, we don't need to supersize everything. So we are more than happy with sedans or hatchbacks. And yes, you are seeing more and more of these people driving their Toorak tractors, their little four-wheel drives. And you're starting to see people buying these big utes from America, like a Dodge Ram. But car park spaces are not designed for these big, chunky American vehicles, because when the planning was being done for these places, those vehicles were an abnormality, something that you would very rarely see. Most of the time, when it comes to shopping centres, generally the people with the really big vehicles like that would just park out the back of the car park area somewhere, or go and park on the roof area where there's lots of space. And in terms also of the size of the spaces, there are planning requirements. Anytime something like that is being built, there is a planning requirement in terms of how many parking spaces must be made available. And if a place expands, they also have to provide additional parking spaces to cater for that expansion. Meaning that, yes, they stick with the standard parking sizes. And you will find that anywhere you go in Australia, car park spots are pretty much all the same size, because that is just the standard based on Australian vehicles. We don't ruin the environment by all driving around in big Dodge Rams. In terms of difficulties in parking, unless you've got a big chunker of a vehicle, it's actually not all that difficult to park in a parking spot in anywhere in the shopping centres. Unless, of course, you have a massive vehicle and you've got it in your head that you want to reverse into that spot and it takes you 2 hours to reverse in. Then that's really on you. That's not about the parking spot. That's about you deciding to buy a supersized vehicle that is perhaps too big for you to manage to drive. I know I sound a bit snarky here, but I think, once again, it's about acknowledging the difference in the culture. And I think that this guy has so far not really noticed that he's in Australia, by the sounds of it.
The third thing that I don't love about Australia is how isolated it is. Again, most of you watching this are probably Australian, and you know that it's hard. It's hard to be so far from everything. If we want to take a vacation, then, the closest place is like Bali, and that's still like a 6-hour flight, depending on where you're from. And if you want to go to the UK, you want to go to America, you want to go to Japan, any of those places are looking at like 10 plus hour flights. That's a long flight. For me to go home, it would be a 14 and a half hour flight, 14-hour flight. And it would cost me at least $1,000. And that kind of sucks, especially Australians are really adventurous people. Most of them have traveled overseas, and it's tough. It's tough to have to shell out that kind of money, especially for me to go visit family and visit friends. It sucks. It sucks to be that isolated. It does lend to the Australian culture. It's the reason Australia is the way it is, especially the wildlife. Australia is basically a gigantic island that separated from the mainland millions of years ago. And because of that, evolution took its course and it wasn't interrupted by other species. And that's why everything here is trying to kill you. That's why. Because nothing could interfere with it until, the white man came and we started pest control companies. But yeah, isolation is something that I don't love about Australia. That's going to be number 3.
I get so fed up with hearing people who move to Australia from the United States or the UK and complain about Australia being isolated and that you can't go anywhere on holidays because everything is so far away. If you caught my previous video, it was a young man who was here for a while from the UK. Didn't work out for him, unfortunately, but one of the things he was saying about Australia was that he loved that there were the different holiday destinations from Australia. So you could go to New Zealand and all the Pacific Islands and so many places that were actually close to Australia that made for really great holidays. And let's not forget, Australia is almost the same size as the United States. We have such diverse climate here. You can go to temperate climate down in Tassie, or you can go to tropical, subtropical up north. then you've got Mediterranean climates around here in central Victoria. All these different climates, all these different types of locations you can go to. So in terms of holidays, it is really not isolated. Maybe it does cost a bit to fly to America, but if you are missing home that much that it's going to cost you. I mean, he's trying to give the impression here that he wants to fly home to America every other day almost. I mean, I think if you are going to move to a country overseas, you do accept that you aren't going to be able to just drop everything and pop home on the weekend. There is that acceptance that you are moving a distance away. And it's not isolated really, because there's this thing called the internet. So, you can have conversations with people, whether it is just through a messenger service of some sort, but you can FaceTime people, you can use Zoom. You're not that isolated. So, I guess it maybe feels that way sometimes for people when they first move here, but I don't think it's a healthy mindset. And I think when people get this mindset, it's not doing themselves any favours. Travel wise, there are so many options, and in terms of returning home, well, if you think that that's going to be an issue before you move to a country, then you need to know what sort of employment you're heading into, and if you are thinking about the costs of moving to that country, you probably need to take into account the costs of returning home for a visit every couple of years or so. But you need to accept that it's not necessarily going to be like just hopping next door to visit your neighbour every other day. And to put it in perspective, if I wanted to head back down to Tassie for a visit, obviously Tassie's not the easiest place to get around with a vehicle, so if I were to do so, I would go on the Spirit of Tasmania, meaning that to get there and back without worrying about accommodation or anything else would probably cost me upwards of $1,000 to take my car with me. Travelling from Sydney to Perth isn't overly cheap, because it's still quite a decent flight. So flying to America costing you $1,000, that's not really so bad. And let's face it, when you move to a country, you know the cost of the flight before you move there. So to get there and then complain that you're isolated because you can't afford the flights back home, okay, maybe now I'm just being a bit harsh. So let's just move on to the next bit.
And speaking of wildlife, number 4 is going to be not necessarily the wildlife, but more the insect thing. Yes, I was wrong. I can admit when I'm wrong. I was wrong. I teased people that, most people I spoke to before I came here said, oh my goodness, Australia, everything's trying to kill you. The spiders, the snakes, oh my goodness. Bears and tigers, oh my. And while it isn't as bad as people, especially social media, makes it out to be, it is not raining spiders. And you don't, I have never checked my shoes before putting my shoes on.
Okay, well that's asking for trouble. For starters, I wouldn't leave my shoes outside. But if I've got a pair of boots that I haven't worn since the winter beforehand, I sure as heck am going to check inside those boots before I put them on, because I don't want a spider bite.
However, I was on the toilet one time recently, a week ago, and I looked to my left and there is a spider, like Spider-Man, just going like back up into the ceiling. And I basically, I'm not super afraid of spiders. I don't like roaches more than I don't like spiders. But I definitely sat there and said, okay, maybe they had a point. Maybe they had a point. And then when I was doing dishes, I looked out the window of my kitchen, and there's a gigantic spider web with a spider probably about the size of my ring on it. I've gone for walks and seen spiders about the size of my palm. Yeah. There are spiders everywhere. It, again, is not as bad as social media makes it seem, but it is something that, I think you just kind of get used to it. Like when I go take the trash out at night, I bring a flashlight and check for snakes. If you're near a bush or like a field or an area where there's like vegetation, there's probably at least one snake in there.
So he's seen 3 spiders and he thinks Australia is overrun with spiders. And now he's saying if you're near any vegetation, there's probably a snake in there. So I'm just wondering if he has actually encountered a snake at all. Because saying that would infer that he's seeing a snake every other day. So he is definitely over exaggerating here. Trying to sell a story, I think.
And that's something that you just kind of deal with. You live with it. You get used to it. Same with the spiders. But as somebody I'm not a big fan of insects. That is not my most favorite thing. And that is something that I dislike about Australia is number 4. Not so much the wildlife. I like kangaroos and stuff. It's just more the insects.
Okay, so I will say it does sound like a lot of people have trouble adapting to just the quantity of insects that occur here in Australia. But can we not over dramatise it as that there's spiders everywhere, almost like you're going to walk into one wherever you go, and that there are snakes in every bit of grass that you walk past? Because that's essentially what he's been saying here. And then he backs it down to he doesn't like insects. Yeah, there's a huge difference between what he's saying here. So he's definitely over exaggerated the point.
Number five, and this is going to be extremely controversial. Oof, all right, I'm going to have to prepare for the comments on this one. I don't really like Australian cars. And this is very much a personal thing, as everything in this video is. This is all just my opinions. But I'm a car guy, and I, obviously being from America, have an affinity for American cars. And while there are some Fords and some Chevys here they're called Holdens, they aren't my favorite looking cars. Like right now, there's a Ford Falcon passing me. I don't love Ford Falcons. I think they look like a Ford Taurus, and I'm not a big fan of those cars. Please, if you're a car guy, don't come at me. There are some cars that you guys have here that I love, that I'm jealous of. I actually really love the Suzuki, I love the Suzuki Swift. I think those are cool. The boxy one, the Suzuki Jimmy. You guys have those. Those are awesome. We can't get those in the US. You guys have Toyota Yaris GRs. We don't have those in the US. Also, I've seen a fair share of Skylines here, like the Paul Walker Skylines. Those are super rare and super expensive in the US. Earlier, I saw a Toyota Supra pass me. This is not to say that Australia doesn't have a cool car culture, or that there are no cool cars here. However, I find that the most of the cars I see on a daily basis, I don't particularly love. Everything here, it looks, I don't know how to describe it. It looks like European or like Asian. I don't know how to put it. It's just, it doesn't have, most of the cars here don't have an American style to them. And I don't love that. Oh, look at this. Actually, speaking of cars, hold on, check that out. That's a right-hand drive Ford Mustang. That's cool. Maybe I was wrong. Hey, look at that. Maybe I was wrong, my Australian car guy friends. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there are obviously. See, I'm looking at a Subaru WRX or maybe an STI. Oh, okay. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are cool cars here. I just feel like for the most part, I don't find most cars here cool. I don't know where I'm going with this, to be honest. I feel like in the process of recording this, I've changed my mind. Because I said this, and then the universe was like, oh, here's like 6 cars that are actually pretty cool. But yeah, number 5 of things I don't love is going to be just the cars that you can get here, especially like older cars. I love older cars. I love old Lincoln Town cars. I love old Crown Vics. I love big boaty cars. And the closest thing you guys have is like Falcons, and I just don't love the Falcons. And so maybe that's where it all comes down to, is I don't like Ford Falcons unless there's the Utes. I do love Utes.
Okay, before I actually address what he's saying here, can we just acknowledge that a lot of Australians don't like Ford Falcons? I had a Falcon for a few years. It was the most unreliable car I ever owned. But I'm not going to get into the Ford versus Holden debate here. But I just want to acknowledge that essentially what he's saying, this goes back to his parking spaces being too small thing as well. Basically, it's that whole, it's a cultural thing yet again. It's the American love of overly large cars, gas guzzlers basically, which in Australia we just don't love, you know. I guess we're not about, how do you put it? We're not as consumeristic. We're not so much about appearances here in Australia. So for many of us, when it goes to buying a vehicle, unless of course you're one of these parents that wants to buy themselves a tool-rack tractor so that their car is like every other car in the street when you're picking up your child from school. But for the most part, we prefer practicality over having the biggest car on the block. Whereas it seems to me that there seems to be a lot of Americans that just like to have the biggest car on the block. And it seems to me that his notion of a good car is the bigger the better. Definitely a cultural thing. And I really hope that Australia doesn't end up becoming like that. I know I, for one, will be sticking with my mid-range hatchbacks and, you know, not so huge cars, because it saves a fortune in fuel, and I have no problems getting a parking space when I go to the supermarket. So that brings us to the end of this video. I think my overall impression here is the things he's said that he hates about Australia, and then he's tried to dampen it down by saying things he dislikes, are essentially things that aren't like America. And I think if you are going to move to a place, you shouldn't expect it to be like where you come from. You should embrace the differences. And if you're not happy about the place and you don't want to embrace the differences, then perhaps you need to rethink your reason for moving there in the first place. So I apologise if I have sounded overly critical, but I wasn't overly impressed with this video. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks for listening. Now, if you are new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit the like button. And leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts. Am I being a bit hard on this guy? I will once again leave the link below for this video and for his channel, so that if you like what you see, you can always go over and subscribe, and you can always go and watch some more of his videos. So thank you, and I will catch you in the next one.